Old folks were wise in their years and would always look at the skies when they smelled something brewing. Corinthians 13:12 says, "For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know, even as also I am known." Simply put, we'll understand it better by and by. Your first kiss, your first car, and yes, your first home. These are the iconic moments in life that epitomize the American dream. For many, this is how the story goes. For others, while a kiss and car are easily attainable, home ownership is not. The harsh reality is that the American dream for many is unattainable. For those who successfully navigate the obstacle course to home ownership, they soon find out that terms like redlining and predatory lending lurked in the shadows of their home ownership. Financially spent due to misinformation and outright deception, many homeowners found the term victim being added to their list of credits. The travesty is that many suffered, but few paid for these crimes of deception and dishonesty. The financial crisis of 2008 resulted from big banks' mismanagement of mortgage-backed securities to the tune of a loss of $30 trillion in global wealth. That's right, $30 trillion. However, only one Wall Street executive went to jail, and the banks were fined $110 billion. Research by Rue and Massey found that the greater the degree of Hispanic and Black segregation a metropolitan area exhibited, the higher the number and rate of foreclosure it experienced. From the appraisals that over or undervalued homes to the mortgage broker who told you just to sign right here, many consumers found themselves in mortgages they could not afford or understand. If you had asked them how many points they paid or their interest rate, a considerable number of consumers targeted for predatory loans would be unable to articulate these terms. Research by Rue, Albright, and Massey showed that African Americans in their research sample paid anywhere from 5 to 11% more on their mortgages, with foreclosures totaling $2 million in lost equity. Many families who were targeted perhaps now recall that friendly broker who, after financing their first home loan, later called them back to tap into their equity when the market and property values were declining. Those families soon found themselves underwater, unable to access any equity for essential repairs. Now overburdened with the debt of a house the owner was never able to afford, let alone repair, the downward spiral begins. Whatever value judgment you make, unless you're wealthy, many people are but one catastrophic event from getting behind on their mortgage. While financial planners suggest having an emergency savings to cover 3 to 6 months' worth of living expenses, a recent survey by the Federal Reserve found that many people would need assistance to cover a $400 unexpected expense. The most important asset you have is your home. Today, the shame and embarrassment concerning your situation ends. Today, we offer hope. Hi, this is Dr. Michelle, and today we're going to be talking about home retention with attorney Alice Nicholson. Welcome to the show, Alice. How are you?
Fine, thank you. Thank you for having me, Dr. Pierce Mobley. I really appreciate you inviting me here today.
Well, Attorney Nicholson, I've heard nothing but fabulous things about you and your ability to be able to direct people and guide them into home retention strategies, if that's the strategy. But before we get into that, because, I have questions, if you could just tell us about your amazing career and what directed you to actually start helping people retain their homes.
Okay, so I'll start by saying how many of us really want financial peace, inner financial peace. We crave for that. And we not only want that, we want money growing in our banks for the next generation. And home ownership is one path to financial stability for not only us, but the grandchildren. So thank you for listening to me today. And again, I truly appreciate being here. And before I tell you about how I got into this, I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up in Grenada, Caribbean island. My dad died, and then my mom moved me and my siblings, 2 brothers, 2 sisters, to New York to broaden our horizons and to really work and serve in our communities. And that's what all of us do. So I went to Hunter College in New York City. I did like political science, and then I went to law school, New York University School of Law. So I've been a lawyer for quite a while, since the mid-'80s.
Wow.
So I worked in the court system, I worked in law firms, I worked in not-for-profit legal organizations. When I was in school, I worked for the ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union, Center for Constitutional Rights. So I've always been protecting and defending my community, people in there, working with families. So about 15 years into my legal career, I decided to try to go into private practice. By that time, I had a wonderful son, and being a mom, running play dates, pick up from school, drop to school, his stuff, finding money, finding clients, it became so difficult that sooner or later, we were on the street ourselves. We didn't have money to pay our rent. Our piano, his dog, our possessions were on the street in New York City. We were down and out. Thank God for mom, we moved in. And then I started working at a legal organization again, getting disability benefits for families, men, women, and children. So I did that for maybe 8 to 10 years. When my son was about to go to college, I'm like, let me venture into private practice again. So it was the time of the mortgage foreclosure crisis. And I was praying one morning when a voice said, go help people save their homes. And immediately I thought, you know what it means to be left homeless. So I jumped in to help, and I do that work to today. So I find that there are many reasons why people fall into financial hardship, like loss of income, taking care of an aged family member, losing a family member, a child, a mom, a spouse, divorce. There are many reasons. And so I help people from business owners to essential workers. My clients are doctors, nurses, policemen. They drive trains, they drive trucks, they're everybody. Or every one of us can find some time in life when it wasn't going so smoothly. So the problem is that people are embarrassed. They live in fear. They try to handle their financial problems themselves. They even go to church and they don't discuss with anyone because they're so embarrassed. So trying to deal with your financial problem yourself is like performing heart surgery and you're not a doctor. And the worst thing you can do is call the creditor for help. That's like the fox, the chicken calling the fox out, saying, help me. You know, and some just do nothing. They just sleep. They live in fear. They get ill health. They just worry. So really and truly, I urge everyone to seek help and good help. So let me say something about how I help my clients. Okay. I just think of the word peace, P-E-A-C-E. So the first word is, I want to know what your personal history is, your profile. Who's in the house? Who's bringing in income? what do you do? Then for E, I want to examine the evidence, your history, the court documents. Then for A, I want to analyze your whole situation, your whole picture. Are you getting Social Security next year? Do you have a kid coming out of school next year? Do you have a child who's going to teach, is working in a bank next year? What's coming up? Let's analyze how you can get out of this. C, let's discuss your challenges. Let's say, these are the roadblocks. Let's see how we could overcome them. E, I just want you to be an excellent, feel good, feel worthwhile, feel like an excellent human being again. So we just have to remember that every one of us can fall into financial difficulty. It's not the other person. It's our family member. It's our neighbor. It's, so I remember helping one lady who, I went to her funeral after she got a modification. And the person doing the eulogy called out to me. I had helped her to stay at her home. Months later, another woman said, Alice, I'm friends with these two other people. We never knew each other was in foreclosure, and we never knew you were our attorney.
Wow.
So she said, we grew up together from the time we were 13. We live on the same block, and we never discussed our situation. So my aim is to have people get help, sleep well.
And bring them peace.
Bring them that inner PEAC.
Thank you for sharing that very passionate story about how you, because of your own personal situation, thought this is the thing that I need to do. This is my life calling. And I think that's always pretty cool when people can find out and know and do the thing that they're destined to do. So before we get into the specifics, I think for a working definition, so people in the audience understand what is a working definition of foreclosure. So people understand when we use that term, what do we mean by that?
So foreclosure is a process by which your lender, your mortgage lender, tries to seize your home because you cannot continue to pay. They can go through the court process like in New York, and I think in Ohio, they have to go through the courts. Some states, they just have a process to send notices and letters, and they can you can find your stuff on the lawn, I think in about 120 days. They don't have to go to court to do that. So that's what's called foreclosure. Now, when you don't pay your mortgage for about 90 days, like 90 to 120 days, you're in that state of foreclosure. Then once they file in court or they do an auction, that's foreclosure sale or foreclosure case. So they're things that people call foreclosure. But when you don't pay for 90 to 120 days, you are in foreclosure.
So that's not a situation where you can say, well, I'm not going to show up to court. What you're saying is the lender can proceed whether you show up or not, because they've notified you that you're in a default, and they're now taking this legal action if they're required against you.
Yes, and I urge everyone, when you get a notice, take steps to save a roof over your family's head. Because not knowing is just so debilitating, not knowing what's happening, not sleeping, not getting energy to get up and take care of it. And there's some avenues to help.
Now, we've been hearing on the news, and I know since we've been in the midst of COVID and the economic crisis that's accompanied COVID, we've been hearing about bans and moratoriums on evictions. And I hope people out there are paying attention to that, because that doesn't necessarily mean everyone's situation. Can you give anyone or everyone in the audience some guidance on what they should be paying attention to when they're watching the news and they hear that the president is going to give a moratorium? What should they do first?
Well, the first thing they should do is call their lender. The lender wants to know if your financial situation has been affected by a natural disaster, so a hurricane like Sandy, or COVID, or if there's a national emergency. Most state legislatures will enact law that the bank cannot proceed with foreclosure or start one. Now, remember, the public policy is not to have everybody in America on the street at the same time. It would really stress out the social services. So recognizing that we're in a natural emergency, a national emergency, they have asked banks to cooperate and give forbearances. So when you call the bank, I recommend going online, because when you call, they don't have people making the decision answering the telephone. Okay. So it's better to go online and apply. You get back responses quicker because it's going to the rail department that handles it. So what they're doing is attaching, if you lost rent, or you lost your job, or you lost the part-time work you used to do, or you had to stay home taking care of kids and you got reduced pay, you know, anything that affected your income, you're entitled, I would say, to a moratorium. And if you go, it's very easy. And a lot of the lenders are putting the past due payments at the end of your loan. Of course, if you have money to pay it up, then do that. Some people have 401ks that they can use. So, and that's the other thing. You can use retirement funds to catch up if you fell behind. You know, especially, well, last year, I believe, the US government issued an edict that you're not going to pay the 10% penalty
for the early withdrawals.
For the early withdrawal. So that's something to remember. You know, if you have, it's better to have the money saving the family's home instead of waiting in Wall Street for the rainy day. We don't want the rainy day to come.
Now, you talked about earlier, but I want to make sure that people understand this. When they get behind, they need to start having discussions with the lender then. They anticipate that there's a tragedy. Do you say they wait till the 30th day, the 60th day? When should they be talking to the lender?
As soon as possible in terms of the national disaster, because they need to do it. That's because I've had people who waited and then they paid during the entire year. Now they're doing it and, you know, the time has passed. So you want to do it. If it's happening now, of course, do that and see what your lender says. But a lot of the lenders are cooperating, so.
Okay, you've given us a really good working definition of foreclosure, and I believe many of us in the audience are better educated on what that is. Can you talk to us about some other alternatives to foreclosure?
Well, filing bankruptcy, for instance. Many state courts also, if you're in a court system, they have a loss mitigation program. Like I say, the public policy is to try to see if families could keep a roof over their head. That's not the aim of banks, of course, so I can't tell you that it's very easy, but you need to find someone who understands how to do a loss mitigation application. Don't reach out to everybody who says 1-800 foreclosure help. Because a lot of people, you have to show a hardship. And people believe showing a hardship means they don't have any money. Or they're spending $1,000 on food when they're only picking up $2,000 a month. You have to show that there was a hardship and you're ready to pay again. Either the going interest rate, something like 40% of your income is allotted to mortgage. So that's what the banks are looking for. So when you're doing the application, you want to make sure that you have that extra money showing to pay your mortgage. If you have a car payment, you put it in because it's on your credit report, they'll run it. If you have credit cards, basically it's 3% minimum payment. You may be paying more, but put that 3%. Leave room so they can see that you are able to pay. And one other thing, not only the person on the mortgage, they accommodate contribution from family members or who are not on the mortgage. So
Wow.
if your spouse isn't there and is making income, that can go on. Your rental, Social Security, anything that's in the household, they will ask, is the person living there? So there are ways. And also in bankruptcy court, you can also file Chapter 13. With Chapter 13, generally, you pay the arrears over 60 months now, and you start paying your mortgage again regularly. So in 5 years, you'll get caught up. During that time, the arrears does not incur interest charges or late fees. So you get back on track next month and you feel good again. You feel like that refrigerator, that pressure that you were having on your back is relieved.
Is relieved.
Mhm.
Now, you've used the term mortgage, and I want to make sure people are clear because not everyone who lives in a home has a traditional mortgage. So let's say someone is doing a land contract. They're not dealing with a bank. They're dealing directly with the owner of the home. Do these moratoriums protect them if they're dealing with a private citizen in terms of the home and they're not able to pay?
Well, you mean the tenants?
Yes. So say that there's a land contract and
Right,
I've written out a contract and agreement with a landlord, a private
right.
citizen, and
Mhm.
I'm not able to pay.
Well, that's a little bit difficult. Landlords are stressing because they have to pay their mortgage. They
Yes.
may not, yes. So even though the banks are kind of looking to say, well, your income, your tenant's not paying, they're a bit nervous about that. In the
Okay.
meantime, the moratorium does apply to tenants. You cannot start tenant eviction proceedings. So it does include tenants because this is a system, I always remind landlords, where one hand washes the other. So we have to look out for each other because we all keeping a roof over our families' heads.
Good. Thank you for that clarification, Attorney Nicholson. So if a homeowner is foreseeing or anticipating foreclosure, they don't see any way around that, would you recommend that they try to hurry up and sell their home to prevent the foreclosure?
Well, in New York, for instance, where it's a court process, it takes a while. It could take, if you don't pay attention, it could take a year. If you paid attention and got an attorney, it could take 5, 10 years, depending on what challenges you
Wow.
bring up. So I tell people, let go and let God. Don't try to rush and sell immediately unless your back's against the wall, because miracles do happen. And I've seen a lot of them.
Wow. I know there was a miracle that you told me about. Do you mind sharing that?
Oh, yes, I have one. I helped a client who was a detective and he was a first responder at 9/11 disaster. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. So he had PTSD from, in fact, I sent you an article.
Okay. I'll make sure I post it.
Yes. He had PTSD after handling 9/11 victims, bodies. Yeah. So he started, soon life unraveled. He couldn't work. And on the eve of 9/11 celebration, he was about to lose his home. So we were able to reach the Daily News, and the Daily News posted a front page article immediately. And Wells Fargo worked with us, and another article came out in a few weeks, saved. So, he had the income because we had already helped him with Social Security disability benefits. So he did have the income and he took his early retirement. So we were able to modify his loan using that income.
What an amazing, amazing story. Wow.
So yeah, so we saved the family, his wife, 2 kids, and him from going on the street. Yeah.
Okay, so foreclosure, let's talk about how it affects your credit.
It will affect your credit. And so does bankruptcy. It affects your credit.
Okay.
But you know, we come to that old adage of balancing. It's a balancing act. You know, do you want to stay in your home, save it for the future, or are you worried about your credit today? You know, things happen. People die, people divorce, people get sick. Things happen that are out of your control. And, you know, I remind people that credit cards that they worried about getting have interest at about 20 something percent. It eats away at your resources. So it's not a bad idea not to have credit cards. A car you can get. The car companies, they want to give you a car. You need a car for work. I have not seen where you cannot get a car because, you know, and the car, the home are the most important things. And I tell people when they said, oh, bankruptcy will affect my credit. Like, if you want to keep your good credit, then print it and see how it feels sleeping in the shelter with your printed credit, good credit under the pillow.
Wow.
So, you know, that puts it
about
in
priorities. You're right. It's
Yes.
about priorities. Wow. Okay, we talked about tenants briefly, but I want to go back to that for a minute. So, because I'm sure we have some people in the audience who rent. They may not be a homeowner, but let's say their landlord is going through a foreclosure. What action or right could the tenant, if I'm a renter, take against that homeowner, particularly if they didn't notify me? And now I find out he's coming to me saying, you got to get out because the house is being foreclosed on.
Well, basically, if there's a lease, the lender or the new owner has to honor the lease. I tell my homeowners it's a good idea to tell your tenant you fell behind, but you're trying to save the home for both, you know, all occupants.
Okay.
So if the tenant could continue paying the rent, if they don't have a financial difficulty, the owner needs that rent to modify the loan. So it doesn't affect the fact that the homeowner is in foreclosure because of whatever, doesn't mean that you don't have an obligation under the contract to pay the rent. You can't just stop paying unless you made an arrangement to say, I want to leave, so would you waive my rent for the next few months so that I could get a new place? It's again a one hand washing the other philosophy and just loving each other, really.
Wow. Okay. So that's excellent advice. So if I have any military families out there, are there any special rules for them if I'm away and we get into financial trouble? Will the courts treat me any differently because I'm serving?
Well, yes, just the service member, because I've had where there's the mom living in the home and the service member's car is parked in front of the home, and he wasn't on the mortgage, the son who was serving in Iraq, and the parents lost their home. So just the service member. And I tried to argue, so the courts aren't sympathetic. Most people in court, you know, they're paying their mortgage. They've never been in that kind of difficulty. They don't understand, you know? So the service member gets, as long as you're in active duty, the lender is prohibited from foreclosing, or credit cards cannot get default judgments. And I think up to a year after your service ends. So So there's some protection for the service member.
That's excellent information. Thank you. So there are organizations, and there are a lot of them, that purport to help people. And I remember you saying earlier, don't necessarily call every phone number that says 1-800-HELP, save your home. Why do you think some of these organizations are predatory maybe themselves and aren't really designed to help individuals when they get in trouble?
So there are things like joint ventures that they may offer, and some are legitimate, but most aren't. They will say, I'll pay your water, I'll pay your mortgage, here's $10,000, here's $25,000, sign, we'll go into joint venture, we will develop this property and you will get profits. We would share the profits half-half. By the time they're done, there's no profit. And you'll find yourself that you've now formed a corporation or something and you're no longer the owner.
Wow.
So, and then there are papers sneaked into when you think you're doing one thing, just giving people, you have to read everything, because when you go to the district attorney and you say, somebody stole my home, and they see there was a notary who came to your house and notarized your deed, there's no way for the district attorney to go and say this person stole, because it looked like you had you made an informed decision with a notary. So you have to read each piece of paper. Now, we've noticed too that a lot of these people advertise on like minority stations and religious stations on Sunday.
Wow.
Yeah, a lot of, and the one giveaway is once you see they asking for $500 every month, $750, send it by wire. Let's sign this for us to take it out. When do you get paid? We'll take $500 every time you get paid. That could go on for a long time. So I've known a lot of people who've paid a lot of money that way. Be very careful about signing paper, either signing your house away or signing your bank account away.
Wow. So what advice, Attorney Nicholson, would you give someone that's sitting out there? I know you talked about all the emotions that you've seen and are normal: embarrassment, fear, anxiety. You just don't want to talk about it. What is that salient advice that if they didn't hear anything else you said today, that's important for them to understand, to get actively involved in understanding or fighting to keep their home? What would you tell them?
Talk to people, pray hard, love well, eat well, sleep well, trust God. Joy will come in the morning.
Wow. And give it to the professionals.
Yes, like get professional help.
Professional help.
Yeah.
Well, Attorney Nicholson, I always give people the last word. I always give my guests the last word. What's the last word you'd like to give the audience this evening?
Well, trust, love. It will work out. God always has a plan.
And you're living evidence of that. You are evidence of that. Attorney Nicholson, thank you so much. And I just want to put you on the spot that I want to be able to have you back on the show, because I think your information, your knowledge, and your wisdom, I think is something that's so needed in our community. And I just want to thank you for coming on Tabernacle Talks.
It was a pleasure for me to be here, and I'm honored that you invited me.
Thank you.
And you do great work. Thank you.
Thank you.
The racialization of America's foreclosure crisis occurred because of discriminatory subprime lending aimed at minority population. Blacks and Latino mortgage applicants are more likely to be declined for a mortgage than their white counterparts, or if offered a loan, will pay higher interest. On average, 10% of mortgage loan applications are denied. That number is 7.9% for white Americans and 17.4% for African American borrowers. "72% of white Americans own homes. 42% of Black Americans own homes." The white and Black homeownership gap today is actually larger than the 27 percentage point gap that existed in 1960 when housing discrimination was legal.